Okay, we will switch gears now. Something that actually Chris is also involved in is our Open Footprint Forum at the Open Group. And we will hear a bit more about what the forum is doing, and then some more specifics about a very interesting way of using a tool that we have um, to make our data model in the forum most useful and tailorable to organizations. The data model really is, as you'll hear, a key part of what the Open Footprint Forum has to offer. And to talk us through what the forum's done, why the data model is important, and how it can be used now. We have two speakers. I'll introduce them both, and then I think AJ will kick off and hand over to Bertrand. But the first is AJ van der Voort, who is the global lead for sustainability assurance at Intertek and part of the leadership team of the Open Footprint Forum. AJ is a customer-focused, results-oriented global executive with more than 28 years of experience with Fortune 500 companies in oil and gas, oil field services, consumer goods, automotive, and government on most continents. So welcome back, AJ. And joining AJ is Bertrand Rieu, who is a project manager working with Net Zero Matrix on implementations of the Open Footprint Data Model standard to improve data management practices. Bertrand was formerly a research fellow at CAPSARC, an independent energy economics and policy think tank in Saudi Arabia, and his work focuses on climate change mitigation strategies for the energy sector, with a focus on technology for emissions allocation agreements, verification tools, and carbon footprint tracking. So a warm welcome back to the Open Group for AJ van der Voort and Bertrand Rieu. Welcome, gentlemen.
I put your mood on. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm AJ van der Voort, co-chair of the Open Footprint Forum, and I'm excited to share with you where we are in our mission to standardize environmental footprint data. And then introduce Bertrand Rieu, who together with the team at Net Zero Matrix, under the leadership of John Curtis, have unlocked that the Open Footprint data model now for AI. For those that are new to the Open Footprint Forum, a few words on our heritage. 8 years ago, the major global operators in energy and their service providers got together with the Open Group and formed the OSDU Forum to create a standard data platform. Fast forward, 4 years later, a separate industry-agnostic forum was created called OFP, short for Open Footprint Forum, specifically for carbon footprint data, representing 80% of global emissions. Now, in that 4 years, those 100 members have developed the Open Footprint Standard to be published in the second quarter of this year. It covers all air emissions, and recently we expanded the scope to include water and waste. The next slide shows the urgency of the situation for two of the main air emissions, that is CO2 and CH4, which you see on the right. On the left, you see that satellites are now scanning the Earth to detect those emissions. I was fortunate to see the data from last week that, for example, in the Permian Basin in Texas, and this is in Texas alone, 290,000 kilograms of methane was emitted in 1 hour. That equals the daily emissions of 46 million gasoline cars and their daily emissions equivalent, and that is measured in CO2 equivalent. We're using their global warming potential factors. If you have been involved in this topic, and if you're not, then I'll explain that. You can multiply the methane with about 80 to get to the equivalent for CO2, and that's called the global warming potential, right? So what are the main features of this open footprint data model, right, which was developed by global climate data practitioners across industries? First of all, as I mentioned already, it's industry agnostic. Secondly, it's very strong in data governance and assurance processes. And that, as we've all learned, playing with AI is critical, right? Thirdly, it is flexible to deal with organizational unique requirements, for example, joint ventures or mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, which happens on a continuous basis. Lastly, it facilitates secure permission sharing, because it is an extremely important thing about emissions data that it's very sensitive data. Now, before I hand over to Bertrand, here are 2 slides on the benefits of participation and how to register with the forum. I will now hand over to Bertrand, who will go into detail about what they have done with the open footprint data model in AI.
Thank you, AJ, and welcome to all of our attendees, and thank you to our host at the Open Group and our other panelists for presenting today. Let me just get my screen up. Excuse me. Yeah, so as AJ has mentioned, and in our introduction, I'm working as a project manager with Net Zero Matrix. We've been working closely with the Open Footprint Forum for just about 2 years now. First of all, understanding how, as an organization in the environmental data management and emissions management industry, we can best leverage the collective knowledge within the Open Footprint Forum in building this standardized data model. And then understanding how, as an organization, we can contribute back to the forum, ensuring this technology, this standard is robust, but also can be unlocked, so to speak, or used by organizations in an application development framework. So my presentation today will really focus on how we can unlock the open footprint data model with the tooling that Net Zero Matrix has introduced to the forum, and the services that we are now building, including, as AJ pointed out, looking at AI and in its role in this hybrid automation of the application development cycle. So one of the things Net Zero Matrix is looking at closely is how to really build AI into our application architecture framework. So I think a real interesting complement or real world example of how AI is now factoring into the architecture approach of organizations. So there are 4 sections to this presentation. The first 3 will be relatively maybe the first half, and then the second half will focus on the active development work by Net Zero Matrix. So first, I just want to give a primer of the open footprint data model. What is inside this data model for those of you that haven't necessarily heard about it yet or haven't looked at it in detail. How the forum, the Open Footprint Forum, is now collaborating, and the collaborative modeling tool that Net Zero Matrix is assisted in putting in place to continue evolving the standard. As we prepare to publish the first release, hopefully Q2 of this year, we continue to iterate on top of that and make improvements from our current members, and obviously those of you that feel the need to join and chime in. Third point is, how can new members or existing members do that? How can you contribute to this open footprint data model? And I'll talk a little bit about the methodologies and the systems we've put in place to do that. And then obviously finally talking about these target specific implementations that Net Zero Matrix is working on, as an example of unlocking the potential of the data model. So what is the Open Footprint data model? It's a system for managing environmental footprints. Our focus obviously is currently on emissions. There's a lot to cover here, right? And we've engaged with various players in this industry, including the WCSD and the organizations behind the World Resource Institute, behind the GHG protocol standards, corporate standards and product value chain standards, and tried to incorporate a breadth of knowledge across various expertise into a somewhat holistic and complete representation of the various components that go into environmental data. Right, looking at organizational structure and organizational boundaries. So how organizations are structured, the ownership structure of those organizations, which are very important in how organizations collect and report data, down to the specific facility and asset structures of those organizations. So the equipments and infrastructure that result in the emission or removal, the release or removal of emissions from the atmosphere. Diving into more specific domains of the product value chain, where we look at the full life cycle, right, of emissions in the context of greenhouse gas emissions. With AJ was talking about the urgency and the rise of both CO2 and methane, right? Understanding how do we capture that from a product carbon footprint standpoint. Again, the WBCSD has done a lot of interesting work on standards in that domain with their PAC methodology for PCF analysis, and we work closely with them, and that's part of all of our specifications aligning with the technical framework that PACT has put forward. Now, as we move forward collecting all of this data, right, about the activities of an organization, we want to put that within a recording context and a calculation context, so that you can then convert these detailed activity-based metrics into reportable statements that you can put into a reporting structure. So the data model is really broken down into these 6 or 7 domains, where we can now inject our data. Now, important thing for many organizations or companies will have, when they're developing their products or their services or their internal management strategies, will really focus on a specific section, right, of these domains. So we wanted to break down the data model into a modular construct, where an organization could focus on, right, the area of specific interest to it. For example, maybe an organization may focus on product lifecycle assessment, so for their primary interest would be on the product value chain domain, or they may be focused on various reporting services, right, to synthesize data from organization into a standardized report. So we've broken it down into these modular constructs, so when an organization goes to implement the standard, they can really focus on that specific area. The other areas may be of relevance, but they don't necessarily need the detail that goes into, say, the facility and asset structure representation. They can still, have those contextual links between domains, but don't need to worry about necessarily implementing the entire system. Now, as we look at how do we do that collaboration and manage the system, we had to think early on, and there was a lot of conversations last year in 2024 and 2023, on how can we do this? How can we implement a collaborative data modeling tool to manage these various domains, and then also assist in converting those, transitioning those into physical implementations or target-specific implementations, so actual working software. So back in 2024, Net Zero Matrix identified and proposed using a modern tool called Hackalade that introduced this novel concept of polyglot modeling. Won't go too much into the details of polyglot. It's a new concept, embedded in the software construct of Hackalade. But the objective and the purpose of using this is really to support modern data design concepts. So in traditional technology agnostic data modeling, right, there's this sort of 3-tiered approach. For those of you that aren't familiar, we'll just go through it at a high level. Right, you have this conceptual construct of what your model looks like, what's the problem you're trying to address or solve. In our case, environmental data management. And you put together a logical construct of that conceptual design. So you have these logical objects or relationships between them. Then you translate that into a physical model. Now, traditionally, right, this approach is focused on several various features, right? Normalization is just a construct in this logical approach of modeling was emphasized. Complex types were not generally supported. So embedded types, JSON objects, things like that, although there has been some evolution. The target, and this is the important thing here, the physical implementation has generally focused on relational database management systems, which are still used widely today. But there's been emergence and shifts in the technology, and there are new systems out there like NoSQL databases or data lakes, right? Unstructured data backends, and various API protocols that have been designed that you may want to layer on top of your logical data model as part of your target specific implementation. So what Polyglot proposes is a slight revision of the this traditional approach, where you have a polyglot model that can then be mapped into a target specific implementation that supports concepts like normalization, but also denormalization, which is common in complex data types in more modern data architectures or databases, and just has this greater degree of flexibility. It's very similar to the traditional approach, but brings in a new era of technical innovation in how data is managed. So now we spoke about supporting these various domains and domain-specific implementations, but we still want to preserve the cross-domain dependencies. So we've put together this structure within the Open Footprint Forum to manage these various domains. And I'll just show you quickly our collaborative GitLab within the forum. So these are resources that are currently only available to members of the Open Footprint Forum. So if you're interested in joining, these are tools that you could then access to both consume the resources, but also contribute back, as I'll talk about in a minute. So within this project, we have a breakdown of our various data domains, right? Essentially these Accolade polyglot files, right, for each of the various domains I've discussed previously. And this common entities, essentially the bridging file, right, across all these domains. Now, each of these domains, we publish as these artifacts, right, documentation, markdown files, and also, we export all the contents to an Excel or JSON documents they can consume. But for members of the forum, the best way to engage with the Open Footprint model is actually through the Accolade software, which I'm showing here, which just gives you a breakdown of all the objects, right, in a various domain, in this case, the facility structure, and obviously a breakdown of relational diagrams, right, these logical constructs for, how the objects are combined. But the interesting thing here is now you can take these polyglot files and create a new target, right, where you want to map these definitions to. For example, Apache Parquet, for those who are familiar with that backend, or a Postgres system. Now I've gone ahead and created, this is a Postgres instance of the data model, or one can then go and do a forward engineering. Right, for example, I could derive a Postgres DDL from this this project derived from the source polyglot model. And you can see here, I now have the DDL scripts. So it's quite easy to then take, the source collaborative data domains that we manage within the Open Footprint Forum community and have these technology-specific artifacts to proceed with your implementation. Let me go back here. Yeah, so now, if you're a current member of the forum, or you're looking to join, and you want to go beyond just consuming, right, the work, and you want to contribute back, we have a detailed maintainers guide, again within our GitLab, all right, that gives you instructions on how. Let me just go back to the summary here. All right. Instructions on how do you manage the entity definition, so these various tables within our domains. How can you submit issues and then resolve issues? I won't go into the detail now, but all of those resources available to help you onboard into this community and start collaborating. So now that you have a sort of high-level introduction to the tooling on how we collaborate within the forum and assist in the deployment of target-specific implementations, I wanted to talk a bit about that work, a bit about the work that Net Zero Matrix is doing in this regard. So there are two areas here. First is the backend database development that we're currently supporting and developing in Net Zero Matrix and have contributed back to the forum throughout the past year or 2 years. And then looking closely at the AI-powered carbon management work that we're doing, and this sort of AI focus as far as the architecture, application architecture that we're looking at within our software development lifecycle. So looking at how we're using AI to assist in ETL or extraction, transformation, and loading workflows. Then, modularizing sort of multi-agent workflows to enhance existing reporting tools and frameworks, and also develop various data sets and analytics. And I'll look at some specific use cases that we're currently building, both for our internal purposes, but also to contribute back to the forum and some of our cross-industry or cross-forum engagements. There'll be, I believe, presentations today on the OSDU data platform, and there's a current harmonization working group within the forum on carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which is a very interesting use case where we're looking at developing data set and analytics that cross across these two areas. Open OSDU focusing on subsurface data, and the Open Footprint Forum focusing on above ground data. In a carbon capture and storage context, obviously, these two areas overlap. You have industries emitting data in various industrial hubs. There are various hubs developing across the world. One, Porthos, is based in near the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. I believe we have Aramco recently joined as a platinum member. They have a hub project they're currently developing in the city of Jubail. There are several across North America, including Texas, and up here in Canada, where I'm based in Alberta. CCS is becoming quite a popular topic as a method for industry to move forward in its decarbonization strategies. So now taking a step back on our backend database development. So the work that Net Zero Matrix has done within the forum, there are several areas we focused on. The first is publishing sort of more modern JSON schema or document database systems, both that are compliant with the WBCSD, which I mentioned previously, these PAC methodology specifications for product carbon footprint analysis, and also looking at how we can take the open footprint data model and create extensions, right? These JSON schema definitions that are extensions to the OSDU data platform. So we can work on integrating the sustainability data, right, with the subsurface data or other, right, data management problems that are addressed by the community, the OSDU data platform community. Yeah, and we're also looking at, part of this development cycle, building APIs that are compliant with existing specifications like PACT, right? So that it connects an existing standard. So you have these focused areas that PACT looks at, product carbon footprint, and connects that to the broader open footprint data domains, where we cover the organizational facility structure through, right, to the detailed recording data that then can be fed into a PCF analysis and provide that underlying context of how the product carbon footprint was produced, carbon footprint statement was produced, which is quite useful when you're dealing with verification and auditing of these final statements, right? There's a lot that goes in there. So we try and create this connected approach and leveraging the expertise of various players. And then, of course, we've been working diligently on supporting traditional relational database management systems and SQL-based data architectures. like PostgreSQL, Snowflake, Microsoft SQL Server. These are all technologies, modern technologies that are supported within Accolade through various plugins like I demonstrated, where you can do the forward engineering of your definitions. Now, we talked a little bit about the backend and the support we're doing there. I wanted to talk now about how we're incorporating AI and LLM orchestration into our workflows. So there are, as we think of taking the open footprint data model definitions, we want to modularize that into these components that can be easily managed within an application architecture. Right? And we want to then be able to take traditional large language models and assist us at various stages in managing those modular profiles, right, that are drawn from the larger open footprint data model. And those 3 stages are the data extraction, and we're looking closely at using tools like retrieval augmented generation. We're basically a convenient way for LLMs to search through documents and extract relevant information. Then taking that information and using modern tooling, do LLM chaining, where essentially we have multiple large language model chained together that can help in assisting, right, through a hybrid approach in mapping and ingesting that data into your data structure, in this case, the open footprint data standard. And then, stage 3, looking at automation of data consumption, right? Now, this isn't to say that a large language model is replacing a traditional application system, but assisting in automating how that consumption workflow would take place. Our focus right now with the NetZero Matrix is really on these first 2 stages, right? And this is looking at, so not just having a chatbot assistant that can summarize the context of documents for you, but actually take action on that. So it can identify information within a data set through, with the support of RAG, but then actually assist the user in injecting that into their backend system. And this is something we're actively working on in order to ensure this, AI-based approach is doing what you intend. At each of these stages, we use this concept of independent evaluators, where you may have, a human, right, that's manually evaluating the results of the agent, or you may have an independent LLM that then goes back and evaluates the result for each of these stages to say, okay, how accurate was it, and can you improve on that? With the objective of having these modular components that you could then plug into a larger application, where the LLM can call on a data set, extract information, but also call on existing toolings, like a database ingestion system. For example, OSDU has various ingestion services. In practice, this modular approach, an LLM could connect to that service, and then once it's done the extraction and mapping, put that into your OSDU backend, your data platform. Just for your context, we've currently been testing this on traditional RDBMS infrastructure, but there's no reason why you can't, replace your backend with some other tooling like OSDU. So RAG is a really important piece in the first stage. This is an example of work we've done using the API compendium of greenhouse gas emission methodologies. API is an industry standard in the oil and gas industry, widely used in North America and internationally. What I wanted to show here is how we're able to use RAG to store a data set, extract some relevant information, and then ingest that or load that into our data system. So just to build on a concept that AJ was discussing earlier in this presentation on global warming potentials, this is an example of using a chatbot assistant to look for information about these GWP multipliers in the API compendium, right? Identify that information. So this is in stage 1, this would be our extraction, right? Identifying where it got that information from the data set. So here we see multiple GWPs. Here, I don't think the components are shown in this diagram, but for various molecules, so CO2, methane, and you'll see here there are different GWPs from different sources that are documented in the API compendium. So this gives you an idea. You have a lot of data you might need to manage here on how you're utilizing GWPs in your reporting. Okay, so we can use AI to try and identify that, and then in stage 2, take this data and map it into our backend. Right. So we've already done use cases where we extract the data from our data set and we're able to load that into in our case right now, PostgreSQL backend, and then we can leverage that in our that modular ingestion of GWP data, which we document as a unit of measure into our broader data profile, modular data profile application construct. So that brings me to this concept of what do we mean by open footprint data profiles, right? So we're breaking down the data model into these various chunks of related entities that we can integrate with AI tooling at the various stages in the workflow, from ingestion, extraction, through to consumption. So I talked about common entities as this bridging domain across our various specific domain areas, like facility structure and reporting. We have concepts of unit of measure, which we were just seeing in the context of DWPs, right? How does that map over, or how, when we're ingesting data for the organization of facility structure, right? We break that down into specific domain areas that an AI agent an LLM could assist in the workflow, similarly for reporting. But then we want to look at, we have these modular constructs, how can we connect them into a contiguous business use case? And this is where it starts becoming interesting. If we're able to, as we're able to fine tune and refine the performance of these agents, we can then combine them together in what we, in the approach that we take, which is a hybrid automation strategy, where we use these AI assistants to hybridize, decisions within a given business case. So essentially, we want to take these hybrid components and develop various integrated use cases. Now, in the context of the open footprint data model, there are various integrated use cases we can think of. And I wanted to help you understand what I mean, give you a summary of how we categorize activities, that go into these integrated use cases. In this case, we have a very basic breakdown of the data model, this concept of inventory types, where we have emission sources, sinks, and credits, So what's released, what's removed, but also what is credited or debited to an organization, which may be, an emission trading system, a tax, or, like an offset that an organization issued. Now, how could we then integrate these various sections of the data model into a into business or commercial application or use case? Obviously there are various ways you break this down, and you get into the finer details for these various inventory types, whether it's technologies that are used within carbon capture and storage or nature-based solutions, and through to various credit schemes, whether it's LCFS, which stands for low carbon fuel standards, a type of carbon footprint analysis, or taxes and allowances and emission trading systems, and other market mechanisms. So one thing we want to do is just help organizations manage at the emission sources level, the integration of their integrating these services, for example, our modular AI agents, to enhance their existing reporting tools and frameworks, whether it's on existing systems that they're operating like SAP, Microsoft BI, or standardized formats for how you consume that data. For example, XBRL templates, which are very, very common in the financial reporting industry, and now are also emerging into the sustainability reporting space through organizations like the ISSB and the IFRS. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the integrated use cases that we're looking at through collaboration with one of the other forums at the Open Group, the OSU forum, is carbon capture and storage. So this is a very interesting use case because we see the combination of source data, so the emission activities released by industries in, say, an industrial cluster. I mentioned the Porthos project, which is a CCUS hub near the port of Rotterdam, where you have various integrated refineries and other heavy industries that have emission capture solutions within their integrated facilities. They can then send that to a transportation system, whether it's a ship or a pipeline network that sends that those emissions to a offshore facility that are injected underground. Now, in order for these markets to operate, there are various specifications on how companies are connecting into the transportation network, and then measuring how that collection of captured emissions are then sent offshore for injection. So these sort of mass balance coordination that needs to happen. And we're looking at how you can use a standard like the Open Footprint Data Model, and obviously some subsurface data collection toolings that are supported by the OSDU community to facilitate in that mass balance assessment, so that you can operate these markets effectively. Right? How companies are purchasing rights for storage, and then ensuring that that storage is achieved right downstream. And then the other integrated use case we're looking at is more on combining emission sources, so the release of emissions by industries, to the credit and debit space, right? So I talked about this credit inventory types. The use case we're looking at here is more on how companies are debited or charged based on the emissions that they're reporting or that are realized in their operations. They produce products. That product has a product carbon footprint on it, and that's sent for import into a jurisdiction. In this case, the European Union, which charges a tax. Right. This is effective legislation, a legislation that is now, legally binding, where any importer of these foreign source products needs to report that product carbon footprint on those commodities. I believe commodities like steel, fertilizers, and some chemicals eventually will be covered. We're looking at how we can use the Open Footprint Data Model and also the modular tooling we're building to assist companies that may view this as a challenge, to say, we've never had to report this kind of information. How do we extract that information from our existing systems and put that into a format that complies with the EU border legislation, what they call the CBAM, or Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So yeah, that's one of the sort of applications that demonstrate how our approach to application development, this sort of modular, AI-assisted ETL systems, can help companies address these new challenges in the regulated reporting space. Yeah, that's I may be short on time, which I think is okay, but that closes out my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, feel free to reach out to me. This is my LinkedIn profile and my email if you have any questions or interested in just contributing or learning more about the Open Footprint Forum or the services and technologies that Net Zero Matrix is currently developing. Thank you for your time.
Bertrand, thank you very much, and AJ, thank you for your introduction. It's a great topic. I mean, you talked just now, Bertrand, about legislation, and I think if I could just ask you to say a few words on some of the regulations, legislation that is already out there, and I think it will be quite a surprise to a lot of people as to what they're already on the hook for in some cases, without necessarily realizing it. But you mentioned the EU rules there. Could you just say a little more about other things that are either in place or coming?
Yeah, so there's actually the EU has passed some other legislation on sustainability reports that large publicly traded companies have to produce, and that's companies that are both operating within the EU or are just simply traded on EU markets. And this is called the EU CSRD. I don't remember the full name of the acronym, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Disclosure Guidelines, but that is a legislation that is now in force. Well, it's now law, but I think it will come into effect in 2025 or 2026. AJ probably knows the timeline better than I do, but how this relates to the work that the forum has been doing and how we've designed the Open Footprint Standard, well, it's been a central driver. And over the past year and a half, several of the members of the Open Footprint Forum have worked closely on building a list of these requirements. So essentially these conformance criteria on what the Open Footprint Data Model should be able to document and cover to address the regulation under CSRD. Now, CSRD is quite broad. It covers a range of sustainability topics. So we looked at specifically the environmental aspect of the ESG, environmental sustainability and governance reporting requirements of CSRD, and made sure that the data model would be able to report on those requirements. This, what we call the North Star, sort of requirement checklist. And as we're currently drafting the standard, we're looking to incorporate those requirements within the conformance criteria of the standard. So if one tool were to implement open footprint data model in their internal systems, that would give them confidence, right, that they were ready or in a better position to conform to the regulations, at least for the environmental disclosures set by the EU government. Now, there are several other jurisdictions outside of the EU that have similar environmental disclosure laws in place. California, the Air Resources Board has something similar. The Canadian government is looking at something, but compared to the EU, I'd say they're just slightly behind. As far as the timeline. Again, AJ, I think, can speak to that. But these are all emerging sustainability standards that, although the current geopolitical environment may not be as much of a priority, they're not going away. And these are only going to become, more of a problem for companies to solve. And companies like Net Zero Matrix and other members of the forum are really, looking at how to make the solutions to those problems easy to implement and readily available.
Absolutely. Thank you.
AJ? If I may, maybe just one note on that one, because regulation around emissions has been around for donkey's years, right? What is different this time is now that people have realized that a lot of that reporting has been done, shall I say, on the back of a cigar box or through spreadsheets, right? Now, these regulations said, we want that data to be audited, like you would audit your financials, right? So that is the big difference, right? So your data needs to be accurate, right? It needs to be audited by an assurance company or being verified, whatever you call it these days, right? And that is globally in most countries now, right? Even China requires that it to be audited, even Australia, the UK, etc. The Europeans have gone very broad and are the first one and have said, okay, by 2026, I want to come in with my auditors and check if your data is okay.
Yeah. So people are going to need things like the data model and the ways of implementing it that the forum's working on, which is great. We can be useful. So a question came in fairly early. I'll start with you on this one, AJ, if I may. And that is that there are seem to be so many standards in this area. We need to make a standard that harmonizes and becomes the only standard. Are you doing anything to make this the standard for industry, like engagement, consultations, promoting, etc.?
Yeah, excellent question. And yes, once you start in sustainability, you get bombarded with all the acronyms and everything else, because I think one of the problems was that nobody knew how to deploy that, and everybody started to create guidances and frameworks and all sorts of ideas. The Open Footprint Standards is the only one right now that, through a standards organizations like the Open Group, has put a data standard forward, right? So we are not inventing a new protocol or a new WBCSD pact or whatever. We are purely focused on the data, right? So we take all that one. So in principle, if you would take our data model, you could, I wouldn't say throw the rest away, because you need to understand it, right? But we're basically consolidating everything.
No, that's great, and I think that's and the cooperations that we have with those other organisations are important to make this stick and get take up too. So that's a great point. Next question, and I'm summarising a little, but lots of companies using cloud service providers nowadays. they already provide sustainability data. So where are the gaps here which need to be captured? Either one of you want to take that?
Bertrand, you want to give it a first shot?
Yeah, so I guess the question is gaps in the existing services that companies already provide, right? I would say one of the primary gaps, at least that I've experienced, working in the industry, is the flow of information between organizations, right? Different companies, some companies may use common cloud service providers, right? There are various solutions out there, sustainability, data management solutions out there, but different organizations have different systems within sectors and across sectors. Now, as we move into more mature regulations, whether it's corporate sustainability reporting or product level reporting, there's an increased need for organizations to share information or that flow of information across organizational boundaries. And I think that's where there's a current gap and need. And that's why a standard like the Open Footprint is very useful. And that's one of the first areas that members of the forum looked at in demonstrating the capabilities of the data model, was that transfer of information across organizations. So whether it's two organizations that have to report, and they may be reporting collectively because of some sort of joint venture, overlap,
right,
or simply, transferring that information from a group of organizations over to the regulatory companies, right? So demonstrating those capabilities with the standard, I think that's where the Open Footprint just the standard itself, but also the technology that we're trying to enable on top of that standard become very useful in filling gaps in the current industry.
right.
And maybe to add one thing to that one, because the critical part in all this is to compare apples with apples, right? If you use different software packages or different other what we've been trying to achieve here is the harmonization or the normalization of the, and I'm going to use this word, units of measure. Because in the past, people have added apples and pears. It's like it used to be in currency in the financials. I mean, if you would ever dare to add pounds and US dollars together, right? I mean, people say, are you nuts? There is an exchange rate between that, right? Anyway, that's a whole other topic. Now, in the sustainability world, we have not only what they call it, the money or the currency exchange rate, we have close to about 28 different kind of units of measure, right? So that normalization, so that you can compare apples with apples and add things together, has been the issue in the past, right? So the open data platform and how you can implement can then become, I call it the system of record. So when an auditor says, how did you get to that number? Number 42, we all know that from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? 42 what, right? So, and how did you calculate that? If you haven't got that normalized, then people have to go through thousands of spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And that ain't going to be great for your assurance bill. Yeah.
And just to build on that quickly, and promoting some cross group collaboration or leveraging resources across forum. There's a group called the Energistics Standard, which actually have a unit of measure standard, and that's actually part of the open group library of resources. That was used in our design of the unit of measure, and how we manage various physical quantity types and the various systems of units that countries or companies may use, right? You've got imperial and the international standard. So yeah, we have embedded that system within the standard. So it's very straightforward and direct to maintain a consistent normalized unit of measure. It's just crucial, right? Especially when you have so much heterogeneity in how values are recorded across the world.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So we are out of time, gentlemen, but I do want to take one question. If we can keep the answer as brief as you can, but it's around the reporting topic. Is there any intersection with FinOps organizations regarding the topic of financial reporting?
Yes, very much so. The IFRS, right, has a sister organization which has developed the standard for sustainability, and it's called ISSB. There's two standards, S1 and S2, which I think came out about sort of middle last year, right? So absolutely, when you look into that standard, so that is the guideline that we abide by, and when we release the standard, you will see we've very much adopted the ISSB standard S1 and S2. So
Right.
yes, we're there. Yep.
Yeah, and I won't take much more time, but within Net Zero Matrix, we've taken there's this concept of XBRL taxonomies for the sustainability disclosures, which come from the IFRS ISSB offshoot, and we've actively been working on how you can capture those taxonomies within the standard and then do your mapping. So whatever data you ingest in your system, then you can then put that into the taxonomy for reporting under IFRS recommendations. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. AJ, Bertrand, thank you very much for your time today. And we do need to go to the break. But thank you for your summaries and answering the questions today. Great job. Thank you.